Okay, so let's talk about nominations and campaigns. Understand that the nomination is the political party saying, hey, here is our guy who's representing us in this race. So there'll be a nominee for president for both parties, and senators, and congressmen, and governors. Each race will have two nominees, one from the Democrats, one from the Republicans. And you're going to have different campaign strategies based on if you are in the primary campaign in the election. You're going to, try to campaign towards those people on the extremes, the crazies, what I like to call them. And then you're going to campaign differently during the general election, where you're trying to attract the moderates, the independents, the neutrals, plus all your sides as well. So the campaign strategy is going to change. When you're deciding to run, you have to really make your mind up well in advance, especially if you're going to run for president, probably 2-3 years in advance at this point. There are rumors that some people are starting to explore and put together committees for the 2016 election. So it can easily last a year and a half more, especially for U.S. president. I will say for the House of Representatives, remember they only have 2-year terms, and once they win the very next day, they're already out fundraising for the next election. So the House of Representatives, they're in perpetual campaign mode. So you need to start out with an electoral base already established. You need to already kind of pick one of the two major parties. Remember, third parties don't have a great shot at winning. Remember that a caucus is just it means a meeting of members, right, of party leaders, of congressional leaders, if you're talking about a congressional caucus. So when we talk about a caucus as a registering, or as a primary voting mechanism, it's just going to be a meeting of leaders of that party, and they're going to pick who they'd like to be in their nominee. Iowa does that. It's organized kind of like a pyramid from local precincts all the way up to the state convention. It's not used by very many states, and Iowa is the most important example. When you are running for president, you're really competing for those delegates, people who are representing each one of these precincts in the state. And you have to win first your primary. You're running against other you're running against other members of your own party so that you can win the delegates, so that you can run the general election. And it started a century ago, and most states use one of these forms of a primary. Remember, we talked about open primary or closed primary, all those kinds of things. Many primaries are early, and they want to be early because that means they're most important. So they leapfrog, they're front-loading. New Hampshire is the first primary. Iowa is the first race, but it's a caucus. So the first primary would be New Hampshire. And these early ones don't generally pick the winner, but they do start eliminating some candidates who have trouble fundraising or aren't attracting people with their message, and they start dropping out after these early races. So we are competing for delegates. We're evaluating the primary caucus system. There's a disproportionate amount of attention to the early states, the Iowa, the New Hampshire, the Florida, and that's why they want to be first, is because there's a lot of attention paid to those. There's a lot of ads that are bought, a lot of hotels and travel arrangements for all the staff, all those kinds of things, opening up of offices. So a lot of attention to these early states. And money plays a big role. If you're going to run for president of the United States, you have to build a billion-dollar corporation in a year and a half, competing in 50 states during the primary stage, and then really competing very strongly in the swing states during the general election. Remember that participation in these primaries and caucuses is really low. It's unrepresentative. We're talking about the crazies. They're ideologically extreme. Their minds are already made up what party they're rooting for. But you have to win those people during the primary stage. And here's kind of what we say about the delegates, right? Iowa's important because it's a filter. New Hampshire's important because it's a filter. If you don't get first or second in one of those first two states, you kind of have to drop out at that point. You don't get fundraising coming in. You have trouble building a campaign and staying in the game. Florida's next, and Georgia, and kind of these early southern states. And then the big states are important because there's a lot of delegate points that you can win for eventually being the nominee. So that's kind of the cartogram of what states are important. And you can see those early ones are disproportionately important. Now, eventually, we get to the convention. It's going to be clear who has enough delegates to be the nominee. And that's when we have a convention. It's kind of like a giant pep rally. It was once a big dramatic deal when we didn't know who the nominee was going to be. Today, they're more of just a formality. We know who the nominee is going to be going in, and it's not as exciting as it once was, and it gets less TV time because of that. They're still important because it's a way for these delegates to come together, get organized, get motivated. It really is the kickoff for the general election when they start campaigning against each other. Also, in the background, they're writing the party platform, where it's the statements of the goals and policies and the general beliefs of what the party wants, and this is being written by the delegates in the background. You will have the official nomination. The candidate will walk out there, give his new speech accepting the nomination of that party, and it's a big deal for that night. When you're campaigning for president, you need to have money, and in order to get money, you have to make contact. And so you call fundraisers on the phone, you call big donors on the phone, you also mail out thousands of what we call direct mail to past Republican or Democratic supporters, whichever team you're for, asking them to jump on your campaign to pitch some money in. But direct mail is an expensive way to do so because all the stamps start adding up. So today, campaigns like to use email, build that email database, and eventually send an email a day or two a day, especially as you get closer, trying to get people to donate. You get media attention through ad budget and free coverage. Free coverage would be if you make an ad that's going to be talked about in the news, then the news will replay it over and over, and that's getting free TV time. The news likes to focus on strategy and events. They like to focus on the horse race, who's in first, by how big of a lead, all of these kinds of things about a race, kind of making it a sporting event. They don't really like to focus on policy difference. So if you're going to organize a campaign, you need a campaign manager. You're going to need a heck of a fundraiser, people who are going to give you some advice along the way, people who are going to create your media. You need to start planning the staff and the logistics. You need bases all across the state, or offices all across the state that can bring in volunteers who will make phone calls and mail out letters, talk to their neighbors, go door to door, all that kind of stuff. You also are going to need pollsters who are telling you what message is most attractive. You need research staff who's going to look up dirt against the other team so that you can use that. And you're going to have a lot of advisors. And a lot of this stuff is going to come from the party and their connections to the National Committee. Remember that party as an organization. They're going to have some of these contacts and help out in ways that they can to win the White House. The FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, was created in 1974 to start administering some finance laws to making sure that these federal elections are not as corrupted by big money sources as they once were. We'd like to publicly finance presidential elections, but the government and all the public money that they give would not be enough, and these candidates are now turning down this public financing because it's only matching. It's 1-to-1, but they only do it to a certain threshold, and then they quit. So if you want to run for president today, you're really not going to take the public money because you have a much better chance at outraising that public money, even though they're willing to match it 1-to-1, but they only do it up to a certain limit. So it creates this limited spending, and that's the downside. It also requires a lot of disclosure. So if you can turn down that public money, you don't have to be as open and transparent to where you're getting this money from. So the FEC was good for a little while, and then these campaign lawyers and accountants started figuring out ways around the FEC, and that would bring us to soft money. And these have no limits. You can contribute as much as you want to use for party building expenses, party advertising. You'll see signs come election time that say vote Democratic, vote Republican. They don't necessarily say a candidate. You'll see bumper stickers and yard signs and all these kinds of things that are going to help individual candidates, but they're not case sensitive. They're not talking about voting for that particular candidate. We see PACs being allowed now, where corporations and unions and other entities are building up this fundraising, this huge amount of money so that they can make their campaign issues important. And there is a huge amount of PACs. I'm sure it's well over 4,000 today, and the money is surely increased as well. They donate to candidates who support their issue. They don't necessarily care about party affiliation, but remember, they're probably going to be more attracted to whichever party has been good to them in the past and that promises to work on their issue in the future. There is not sufficient data to say that PACs can buy candidates, because remember, they're probably donating to people who agree with them in the first place anyways. So here's an example of some of these PACs. You can see that Microsoft gives $4 million, Philip Morris, who owns Kraft, and some of these companies. Then you have some unions, and then the NRA and Emily's List, and you can see how much money, over easily 30,000, 40 million, I'm sure by now, to these representatives, and you can see in what proportion they give to Republicans. So Microsoft kind of hedges their bet. They go halfway. Philip Morris, you can see, gives overwhelmingly to Republicans, as does the NRA, whereas unions and this pro-choice group, Emily's List, does not donate to Republicans. They do not donate to Republicans really at all. Are campaigns too expensive? Sure they are, and they take up a ton of time, and they take our politicians' minds off of governing and legislating and put it onto raising money and calling big donors, and sure, that's a big problem, but how do we fix it? The closer the race is, the more money that's needed, and typically the people who win raise the most money. Is that because they're more attractive candidates and thus they raise more money, or is it the people who win had the most money to begin with? I don't know which way it is, but there's a correlation there, and if you're running, you definitely want to have more money than the other guy. Let's take a moment and look at reinforcement versus activation versus conversion. Remember that you're not really going to change hearts and minds very often, and to do so is very time consuming and it costs a lot of money. So what you want to do is activate people who are on the sidelines, maybe who don't care as much, or reinforce those voters who you know are going to vote for you, but you got to get them out. You got to motivate them. So you really want to do more of those first two, a little bit less of the conversion. You don't want to get into debates. You just want to get your team out and get them out bigger. So yeah, reinforce, activate. That's because people have a selective perception. They pay attention to things they agree with. This is why Fox News is so big, because of selective perception. It reinforces everything that their watchers already believe. Party identification, it still has an effect. Incumbents, that is the greatest way to win, is to already hold office. You're going to have an easier time fundraising. You're also going to have better name recognition. So the single most important thing to getting elected, perhaps, is already being in office. Incumbents get reelected well over 70% of the time in both both houses of Congress. So, are they too democratic? They're open to almost everyone, but time and money are consuming, and that might limit who can actually be nominated, who can actually campaigns. It does involve a lot of communication. The mass media is going to be really important, but it's hard to be all things to all people. So remember, you want to reinforce, you want to activate your team. You're not really caring so much about conversion. So thanks.